I'm Sarah Chen, 28 years old, and I'm about to tell you about the day my entire world flipped upside down in a boardroom on the 34th floor of a Seattle high-rise. It was the day I discovered that sometimes the person trying to destroy your career is actually working for you, and they just don't know it yet. What happened in that conference room didn't just change my life. It changed everything I thought I knew about power, respect, and who really holds the cards in the corporate game. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I was raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. Grandma Lily was the strongest woman I ever knew, a first-generation immigrant from Taiwan who built a small tech consulting business from her garage in the 1980s, when women in technology were practically unicorns. She taught me 2 things that would define my entire life: work twice as hard as everyone else expects you to, and never let anyone make you smaller than you are. What I didn't know until much later was that her little consulting business had grown into something much bigger than I ever imagined. I studied computer science at University of Washington, working night shifts at a 24-hour diner to pay for textbooks and rent. While my classmates were partying or sleeping, I was coding until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. By graduation, I had already developed 3 mobile applications that were generating modest revenue, but more importantly, they were solving real problems for small businesses. I wasn't just learning theory, I was building solutions that mattered. After graduation, I applied to dozens of companies, but the tech industry in Seattle was brutal for someone like me. No connections, no family money, no prestigious internships at big-name companies. I was just another Asian girl with good grades and big dreams, competing against candidates whose parents knew someone who knew someone. Rejection after rejection taught me that talent wasn't always enough, and sometimes the door you're knocking on was never going to open, no matter how hard you knocked. TechVision Solutions was my break, or at least that's what I thought. It was a mid-sized software development company specializing in business automation tools, exactly the kind of work I was passionate about. When they offered me a junior developer position, I didn't care that the salary was lower than I'd hoped, or that the office was in a converted warehouse instead of a gleaming downtown tower. I was finally in the door, finally getting my chance to prove what I could do. Robert Mitchell was my direct supervisor, a man in his early 40s who wore expensive suits and had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He had that particular brand of arrogance that some men develop when they've been promoted, just enough to feel important, but not enough to actually be secure. From my first day, he made it clear that he saw me as a diversity hire, someone the company brought in to fill quotas rather than contribute meaningfully to the work. During my first week, I submitted a proposal for streamlining our client onboarding process, a system I'd noticed was creating bottlenecks and costing the company both time and money. I'd spent my entire weekend mapping out the current workflow, identifying problem areas, and designing a more efficient alternative. When I presented it to Robert, he barely glanced at the documentation before dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "Chen," he said, not even bothering to use my first name, "stick to the tasks you're assigned. We don't need junior developers reinventing the wheel." But I kept working. I kept building. I kept solving problems, even when those solutions were ignored or attributed to other team members. When our biggest client complained about slow response times on their custom dashboard, I spent 3 nights debugging and optimizing the code until it ran seamlessly. When the sales team struggled to demonstrate our software's capabilities to potential customers, I created an interactive demo that closed deals faster than anything they'd used before. Each time, Robert would either minimize my contribution or find ways to redirect credit to more senior team members. Jennifer Walsh from HR would occasionally check in with me, asking how I was adjusting to company culture and whether I had any concerns about my work environment. I wanted to tell her that my supervisor treated me like an inconvenience, that my ideas were consistently overlooked, that I felt like I was working twice as hard for half the recognition. But I also knew that speaking up could make things worse, could mark me as a troublemaker or someone who couldn't handle the pressure. So I smiled and said everything was fine, that I was learning a lot and grateful for the opportunity. The truth was, I was learning a lot, just not what I'd expected. I was learning that brilliance without backing was often invisible, that innovation without influence could be easily stolen, and that sometimes the people who should be mentoring you are actually threatened by what you might become. I was learning to document everything, to copy myself on emails, to make sure there was always a paper trail proving which ideas originated from my desk and which solutions bore my digital fingerprint. Marcus Thompson was one of the few colleagues who actually seemed to notice my work. A senior developer with 15 years of experience, he had the kind of quiet authority that came from genuinely understanding the technology rather than just managing it. After a particularly frustrating team meeting where Robert had once again dismissed one of my suggestions only to propose something nearly identical 20 minutes later, Marcus pulled me aside. "I see what's happening here," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure we wouldn't be overheard. "And for what it's worth, your work is solid. Better than solid, actually. Don't let him make you doubt what you know." It was the first time anyone at TechVision had acknowledged my capabilities directly, and I felt a mixture of validation and sadness that such basic recognition felt so rare. Kevin Park worked in IT support, and we developed a friendship based on our shared experience of being overlooked despite our contributions. He was the one who kept the entire company's technology infrastructure running smoothly, but to most people, he was invisible until something broke. We'd grab coffee together and commiserate about the frustration of being essential but unacknowledged, talented but underestimated. "Sometimes I think about just walking away," he'd say, "finding somewhere that actually values what I bring to the table." I understood that feeling completely. There were nights when I'd sit in my small apartment, looking out at the Seattle skyline, and wondering if I was wasting my time at TechVision. I had other options, other companies that might appreciate my skills more openly. But something kept me there. Something I couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it was stubborn determination to prove myself in a place that doubted me. Maybe it was the hope that things would eventually change. Or maybe it was something deeper, something I didn't yet understand about my connection to this particular company. The breaking point came during our quarterly review meeting, a company-wide gathering where department heads presented their team's achievements and outlined goals for the upcoming quarter. These meetings were typically dry affairs, filled with PowerPoint presentations and corporate speak, but they were also opportunities for visibility, chances to showcase work and gain recognition from upper management. I had been working on a major project for 3 months, a complete overhaul of our inventory management system that would save the company thousands of dollars annually while improving accuracy and user experience. I'd spent weeks preparing for the presentation, creating detailed documentation, gathering performance metrics, and building a demonstration that clearly showed the before and after improvements. I knew this was my chance to finally get the recognition I'd been working toward, to show the leadership team that I was capable of much more than the junior-level tasks I'd been assigned. The night before the meeting, I practiced my presentation until I could deliver it flawlessly, until every transition was smooth and every key point was crystal clear. When the morning arrived, I dressed carefully in my best professional outfit, a sharp navy blazer that my grandmother had bought me for graduation. I arrived early, set up my laptop, and tested all the technical components of my presentation. Everything was perfect, everything was ready. As the conference room filled with department heads, senior managers, and board members, I felt a mixture of nerves and excitement that reminded me of defending my thesis in college. Robert opened our department segment with his usual corporate overview, discussing team structure and general objectives in broad, meaningless terms. Then he began highlighting specific achievements, and I waited for my moment, for him to introduce the inventory management project and call me forward to present. Instead, he launched into a detailed explanation of the project himself, describing it as a collaborative effort that had required significant oversight and guidance to reach completion. I sat frozen in my chair as he presented my work, my code, my solution, as if it were his own creation. He used my screenshots, my metrics, my demonstration, but every achievement was framed as his leadership, his vision, his successful management of a complex technical challenge. When he mentioned my name at all, it was only as a junior team member who had been responsible for basic implementation under his direction. The room was full of impressed murmurs and approving nods as Robert fielded questions about the project, answering with information he'd gathered from my documentation, but presenting it as his own expertise. I felt my face burning with a mixture of humiliation and rage, but I forced myself to remain calm, to maintain the professional composure that had been drilled into me since childhood. Speaking up now would only make me look like a disgruntled employee, unable to accept my place in the hierarchy. When someone asked about the timeline for implementing similar improvements in other departments, Robert smiled confidently and said, "Well, projects like this require the right kind of leadership and vision. Not everyone on the team has the experience necessary to see the big picture. But with proper guidance, even junior developers can contribute to meaningful solutions." That was the moment something inside me crystallized. The moment I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting my career, it was destroying it. If I continued accepting this treatment, if I continued allowing my work to be stolen and my contributions to be minimized, I would spend my entire career watching other people get promoted for my ideas. The only thing worse than being underestimated was accepting that underestimation as accurate. After the meeting, I walked straight to Jennifer Walsh's office and requested a private conversation. I had reached the point where staying quiet felt more dangerous than speaking up, where protecting myself meant taking the risk of being labeled difficult or ungrateful. Jennifer listened as I laid out everything that had been happening, providing detailed examples and documented evidence of my work being misrepresented and my contributions being systematically minimized. "I understand this is a serious allegation," Jennifer said carefully, "and I want to make sure we handle this appropriately. Can you provide me with concrete examples and documentation?" I handed her a folder I'd prepared, containing email chains, code repositories, project timelines, and every piece of evidence that proved my involvement in the work Robert had claimed. I had learned to protect myself through documentation, and now that preparation was about to become crucial. Jennifer promised to investigate the situation thoroughly and scheduled a formal meeting for the following week to address my concerns. As I left her office, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. I had finally spoken up, finally advocated for myself. But I also knew that challenging someone in Robert's position could have serious consequences for my career at TechVision. There was no going back now, no pretending that everything was fine or that I could continue working under the current conditions. That evening, I called my grandmother for the first time in weeks. Hearing her voice reminded me of all the late-night conversations we'd had when I was younger, when she'd tell me stories about building her business in a world that didn't want to take her seriously. "Sarah," she said after I'd explained the situation, "sometimes you have to fight for your place at the table, even when fighting feels impossible. But remember, the strongest position isn't always the most obvious one." I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but her words stayed with me as I prepared for what I knew would be a difficult week. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I had no idea that her cryptic advice was about to become the most important guidance I'd ever received, or that the fight I was preparing for was going to reveal truths I never could have anticipated. The formal meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in the main conference room, the same space where Robert had stolen credit for my work just days earlier. Jennifer had arranged for Diana Rodriguez, the board chair, to attend, along with 2 other senior executives I didn't recognize. As I walked into that room, carrying another folder of documentation and wearing the same navy blazer that had felt so empowering earlier that week, I had no idea that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. What happened next would teach me that sometimes the people who try to diminish you are actually working for you without knowing it, and that the power you think you're fighting for might already be yours in ways you never understood. But that's a story for the next part, because the real revelation was still waiting for me behind a conference room door I was about to walk through, carrying nothing but my documentation and my grandmother's mysterious advice about the strongest position not always being the most obvious one. Walking into that conference room felt like entering a courtroom where I was both the plaintiff and the defendant. Diana Rodriguez sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun that spoke of decades navigating corporate boardrooms. She had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it, the quiet authority of someone who had earned her position through competence rather than politics. Beside her sat 2 executives I recognized from company emails, but had never met in person: Thomas Chen, the Chief Technology Officer, and Patricia Williams, the Chief Financial Officer. Jennifer Walsh had positioned herself across from where I was directed to sit, her expression carefully neutral as she arranged papers in front of her. The formal setup felt intimidating, designed to remind me of my place in the company hierarchy and the seriousness of the allegations I was making. Robert Mitchell entered last, his expensive suit and confident stride unchanged, despite the circumstances. He nodded to the executives as if this meeting were merely a minor inconvenience in his busy schedule. Diana opened the meeting with a brief explanation of why we were gathered, her voice measured and professional. She outlined the concerns I had raised about attribution of work and professional treatment, making it clear that TechVision took such matters seriously. As she spoke, I noticed Robert's expression remained unchanged, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, as if he found the entire proceeding amusing rather than threatening. Jennifer began by reviewing the documentation I had provided, projecting emails and project timelines onto the large screen at the far end of the room. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized, showing clear patterns of my work being reassigned or minimized over the course of nearly 2 years. She walked through specific examples, from the client onboarding process I had redesigned to the interactive sales demo that had increased conversion rates by 30%. The inventory management system project took up the largest portion of the presentation. Jennifer displayed my original proposal, complete with technical specifications and implementation timeline, then showed how the project had been presented to the board with Robert as the primary architect. The contrast was stark and undeniable, like comparing an original painting to a forgery that claimed to be authentic. Throughout the presentation, Robert maintained his composure, occasionally nodding as if he were hearing this information for the first time. When Jennifer finished, Diana turned to him for his response. He leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to one of patient condescension, the look of a teacher preparing to correct a confused student. "I appreciate Sarah's enthusiasm," he began, his tone suggesting that enthusiasm was somehow a flaw rather than an asset. "But I think there's been some misunderstanding about how projects work in a corporate environment. Yes, Sarah contributed to these initiatives, but contribution and leadership are very different things. As her supervisor, I provided the strategic vision, the project management, and the oversight necessary to turn raw ideas into successful implementations." He stood and walked to the presentation screen, pointing to various elements of my work as if he were explaining complex concepts to children. Junior developers often focus on technical details without understanding business context. My role was to ensure that Sarah's coding abilities were channeled productively, that her work aligned with company objectives, and that projects were completed on time and within budget. That's not stealing credit, that's management. The confidence in his voice was absolute, the certainty of someone who had never been challenged on his version of events. He looked directly at me as he continued. "I understand that ambitious young employees sometimes feel their contributions aren't recognized quickly enough, but that's part of learning how corporations function. Not everyone can be the star player immediately, regardless of their technical skills." Patricia Williams, the CFO, asked several questions about project budgets and timelines, clearly trying to understand the financial impact of the work in question. Robert answered smoothly, referencing numbers and projections that came directly from my documentation, but presenting them as his own analysis. His familiarity with the details was impressive, the result of months spent reviewing and repurposing my work. Thomas Chen, the CTO, focused on technical aspects, asking about specific coding challenges and architectural decisions. This was where Robert's performance became less polished. While he could speak confidently about business metrics and project management, the deep technical questions revealed gaps in his understanding. He deflected these inquiries by emphasizing his role as a strategic leader rather than a hands-on developer, suggesting that getting lost in technical details was beneath his current position. I watched this performance with a mixture of admiration and disgust. Robert was skilled at corporate theater, at presenting himself as the competent manager guiding inexperienced employees toward success. If I hadn't been the person whose work he was claiming, I might have found his explanation convincing. He understood exactly how to frame the situation to make my complaints seem like the whining of an entitled junior employee who didn't understand workplace hierarchies. When Diana asked for my response, I felt the weight of every eye in the room. This was my moment to defend myself, to push back against Robert's narrative. But I also knew that appearing defensive or emotional would only reinforce his characterization of me as immature and unrealistic. I took a breath and focused on facts rather than feelings, on evidence rather than accusations. I walked through the technical architecture of the inventory management system, explaining design decisions and implementation challenges in detail that made it clear I understood every aspect of the project intimately. I discussed the specific algorithms I had developed for data optimization, the user interface elements I had designed based on customer feedback, and the testing protocols I had established to ensure system reliability. My knowledge was comprehensive and precise, the kind of deep understanding that comes from building something from the ground up rather than managing it from a distance. Thomas Chen asked several follow-up questions that tested my technical knowledge, and I answered them without hesitation. Patricia Williams inquired about the cost-benefit analysis I had prepared for the project, and I walked her through the financial projections I had calculated, explaining how I had arrived at my estimates for time savings and efficiency improvements. With each answer, it became increasingly clear that I wasn't just a contributor to these projects. I was their primary architect. Robert's expression shifted slightly as I demonstrated the depth of my involvement and understanding. The confident smile faded, replaced by a tighter, more controlled expression that suggested he was recalibrating his strategy. When Diana asked him to respond to the technical details I had provided, he pivoted to discussing the importance of team collaboration and shared credit, suggesting that individual contribution was less important than collective success. "What concerns me," he said, his tone becoming more serious, "is this apparent need for individual recognition at the expense of team unity. Sarah is clearly talented, but talent without teamwork is actually counterproductive in a corporate environment. My job is to foster collaboration, not to enable ego-driven behavior that undermines group dynamics." The reframing was masterful and infuriating. By positioning my desire for appropriate credit as selfishness, Robert was making my legitimate complaints seem like character flaws. He was turning my advocacy for myself into evidence that I was difficult to work with, unsuited for advancement, and potentially toxic to team morale. It was a classic manipulation tactic, and I could see from the executive's expressions that it was having some effect. Jennifer Walsh intervened at this point, presenting additional documentation that showed a pattern of similar issues with other employees under Robert's supervision. She had apparently conducted a broader investigation, interviewing team members and reviewing personnel files. The picture that emerged was troubling. Multiple instances of work being reassigned, contributions being minimized, and talented employees leaving the department after expressing frustration with recognition and advancement opportunities. Marcus Thompson had provided a written statement detailing instances where he had witnessed my work being misattributed. Kevin Park had documented technical solutions I had developed that were later presented as collaborative efforts with minimal acknowledgement of my role. Even some of the more senior developers had noticed the pattern, though most had remained silent to avoid creating workplace conflict. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but Robert continued to deflect and reframe. He characterized the other employees' statements as the result of coaching or manipulation, suggesting that I had influenced their perceptions to support my own agenda. He questioned their motivations and their understanding of management decisions, implying that rank-and-file employees weren't qualified to evaluate supervisory effectiveness. Diana Rodriguez had remained largely silent throughout this exchange, taking notes and observing the dynamics between Robert and the rest of the room. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that commanded immediate attention from everyone present. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her tone carefully controlled, "you've presented your perspective clearly, and I appreciate your detailed responses to our questions. However, I'm concerned about some inconsistencies between your account and the documentation we've reviewed. More significantly, I'm troubled by what appears to be a pattern of behavior that could be creating liability issues for the company." Robert's confident expression flickered for the first time during the meeting. The mention of liability issues was corporate speak for potential lawsuits, discrimination claims, and the kind of legal exposure that could destroy careers and cost companies millions of dollars. His voice became more careful, more measured as he responded. "I understand your concern, Diana, but I think we need to be careful about drawing broad conclusions from isolated incidents. Every manager faces challenges with employee expectations, and sometimes those challenges require difficult conversations about performance and advancement. I've always operated within company guidelines and human resources protocols." Thomas Chen leaned forward, his technical background making him particularly interested in the substantive aspects of my work. "Sarah," he said, addressing me directly, "can you walk me through the algorithm you developed for the inventory optimization system? I'm particularly interested in how you handled the database query efficiency issues." The question was clearly a test, designed to verify whether I truly understood the technical aspects of the work I was claiming. I spent the next 10 minutes explaining the algorithmic approach I had taken, drawing diagrams on the whiteboard, and discussing the trade-offs between different optimization strategies. My explanation was detailed and confident, demonstrating not just familiarity with the work, but the kind of deep understanding that comes from wrestling with complex problems and developing innovative solutions. When I finished, Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's elegant work," he said. "The approach you took for handling concurrent database access is particularly sophisticated. How did you come up with that solution?" I explained the research I had done, the technical papers I had read, and the iterative process of testing and refinement that had led to the final implementation. As I spoke, I could see Robert's discomfort growing. He clearly understood enough to realize that my knowledge was far beyond what would be expected from someone who had merely implemented someone else's design. Patricia Williams asked about the financial projections I had mentioned, wanting to understand how I had calculated the cost savings and efficiency improvements. I walked her through my analysis, explaining how I had gathered baseline performance data, estimated the impact of proposed changes, and projected the financial benefits over different time horizons. The level of detail surprised her. This wasn't the kind of business analysis typically expected from junior developers. As the meeting continued, the dynamic in the room shifted perceptibly. What had begun as an investigation into my complaints was becoming an evaluation of Robert's management practices and truthfulness. The executives were asking increasingly pointed questions about his oversight and involvement in the projects under discussion. His answers became more defensive and less specific, relying heavily on generalities about leadership and team management. Diana Rodriguez called for a brief recess, during which the executives huddled in quiet conversation, while Robert stepped outside to take a phone call. I remained in the conference room with Jennifer, who was organizing her papers, and appeared to be preparing for the next phase of the meeting. "How do you think it's going?" I asked quietly, needing some indication of whether my decision to speak up had been wise or catastrophically naive. Jennifer considered her response carefully. "The documentation you provided is very compelling," she said. "And your technical knowledge clearly supports your claims about your level of involvement in these projects. The executives are taking this seriously, which is what we hoped for when we scheduled this meeting." When everyone returned, Diana's demeanor had shifted subtly. She seemed more focused, more decisive, as if the conversation during the break had clarified her thinking about the situation. She addressed Robert directly, her tone professional but unmistakably serious. "Mr. Mitchell, based on our review of the evidence and our discussion this afternoon, we have significant concerns about the management practices in your department. The pattern of behavior documented here suggests problems that go beyond individual performance issues or communication misunderstandings. We're particularly troubled by the apparent systematic minimization of employee contributions and the potential impact on company culture and legal exposure." Robert's response was measured, but I could detect an edge of panic beneath his professional composure. "Diana, I understand your concerns, and I'm committed to addressing any issues that may have arisen. Perhaps we could discuss additional training or revised protocols that would help prevent misunderstandings in the future. I'm confident that we can resolve these issues without disrupting the productivity and success of the department." It was a classic corporate deflection, acknowledging problems while minimizing responsibility and proposing solutions that didn't require admitting fault. Robert was skilled at this kind of damage control, but I could see that his usual tactics weren't having their expected effect on the room. Thomas Chen spoke up again, his technical background making him particularly sensitive to issues of intellectual property and innovation credit. "The work Sarah has described represents significant value creation for the company. If her account is accurate, and the evidence strongly suggests it is, then we have a serious problem with how innovation is being recognized and rewarded in this department. That's not just a personnel issue, it's a business problem that could affect our ability to retain and motivate talented developers." The conversation continued for another hour, covering policies, procedures, and potential remedies for the situation. I answered additional questions about my work and my experience at TechVision, while Robert continued to defend his management approach and suggest that the issues were being blown out of proportion. As the meeting wound down, Diana announced that the executives would need time to review everything that had been discussed and determine appropriate next steps. She emphasized that TechVision was committed to maintaining a fair and supportive work environment for all employees, and that any necessary changes would be implemented promptly and comprehensively. Walking out of that conference room, I felt drained but cautiously optimistic. I had presented my case as clearly and professionally as possible, and the executives seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. Whether that understanding would translate into meaningful change remained to be seen, but at least I had finally spoken up, finally advocated for myself in a way that my grandmother would have been proud of. What I didn't know was that this meeting had set in motion a series of events that would completely transform my understanding of my place at TechVision and my relationship to the company itself. The real revelations were still to come, and they would change everything I thought I knew about power, ownership, and who really held the cards in the corporate game I had been playing. The days following the conference room confrontation moved with the strange, suspended quality of waiting for test results that could change your entire life. I returned to my desk each morning not knowing if I'd be called into another meeting, transferred to a different department, or quietly pushed toward the exit. Robert maintained his usual professional demeanor, but there was a new tension in his interactions with me, a careful distance that hadn't existed before. He assigned me routine maintenance tasks rather than challenging projects, the kind of busy work designed to keep me occupied while bigger decisions were made above my pay grade. Kevin Park noticed the change immediately when we met for our usual coffee break on Friday morning. "You look like someone who's waiting for the other shoe to drop," he said, stirring sugar into his espresso with more concentration than the task required. We had established a routine of meeting in the small cafe on the building's ground floor, a neutral space where we could speak freely without worrying about who might overhear our conversations. I told him about the formal meeting, though I kept the details vague to protect both of us. Kevin listened with the kind of focused attention that comes from understanding workplace politics and the precarious position of employees who dare to challenge authority. He had seen others speak up about unfair treatment, and he had watched some of them disappear from the company shortly afterward, their departures explained as voluntary resignations or mutual agreements. "The thing about corporate investigations," Kevin said quietly, "is that they can go either way. Sometimes they actually fix problems, but sometimes they just identify who the problems are, if you know what I mean." His words carried the weight of experience, the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had survived in corporate environments by understanding their unwritten rules and hidden dangers. That afternoon, Jennifer Walsh stopped by my desk with a brief update. The executives were still reviewing the situation and would have a decision early the following week. She seemed optimistic but cautious, the way HR professionals learn to be when dealing with sensitive personnel matters that could explode in multiple directions. "Just keep doing good work," she advised, "and let the process run its course." The weekend stretched endlessly, filled with second-guessing and anxiety. I found myself replaying every moment of the conference room meeting, wondering if I had said too much or too little, if I had appeared confident or defensive, if I had made a compelling case or simply sounded like a disgruntled employee making excuses for her own shortcomings. Sunday evening, I called my grandmother again, needing her steady voice and practical wisdom. "Sarah," she said, after I had explained the situation, "do you remember what I taught you about chess when you were little?" I did remember, though I hadn't thought about those lessons in years. Grandma Lily had been an excellent chess player, and she had spent countless hours teaching me strategy and patience. "The most powerful piece on the board isn't always the most obvious one," she continued. "Sometimes the queen is hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal her true position." Her words were cryptic, as they often were, but they carried a certainty that calmed my nerves. Grandma Lily had never been wrong about strategic thinking, whether in business or in life. If she was telling me to be patient and trust the process, then perhaps my situation wasn't as precarious as I feared. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that made everything feel muted and uncertain. I dressed carefully in my most professional outfit, the navy blazer that had become my armor for important meetings. The office felt different somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't quite identify. Conversations seemed more hushed, glances more meaningful, as if everyone sensed that significant changes were coming but no one knew exactly what they would be. The call came at 10:30. Jennifer Walsh's voice was carefully neutral as she asked me to come to the executive conference room immediately. She offered no hints about what to expect, but something in her tone suggested that this wasn't going to be a routine follow-up meeting. I saved my work, closed my laptop, and walked through the office with what I hoped appeared to be calm confidence, rather than barely controlled anxiety. The conference room setup was different this time. Diana Rodriguez sat at the head of the table as before, but she was flanked by people I didn't recognize. A woman in an expensive suit who had the bearing of a high-powered attorney, and a man with silver hair who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and major decisions. Thomas Chin and Patricia Williams were present again, but their expressions were more serious, more focused than they had been during the investigation meeting. Robert Mitchell was notably absent. Diana gestured for me to take a seat, then began speaking in the measured tone of someone delivering prepared remarks. "Sarah, we've completed our review of the concerns you raised, and we've made several important decisions regarding your situation and your future with TechVision Solutions. Before we discuss those decisions, however, there are some things you need to know about this company and your relationship to it." The phrase "your relationship to it" struck me as oddly formal, more significant than the usual corporate speak about employee engagement and company culture. Diana exchanged a glance with the silver-haired man, who nodded slightly as if giving permission for her to continue. "First, let me introduce you to Richard Hamilton, our senior legal counsel, and Margaret Foster, who represents the law firm that handles our corporate governance matters. They're here because what we're about to discuss has significant legal and financial implications that go far beyond a typical personnel issue." My stomach dropped. Legal counsel meant serious consequences, potentially for me as much as for Robert. I had filed a complaint about workplace treatment, not alleged criminal behavior or major policy violations. The presence of attorneys suggested that my situation had escalated far beyond what I had expected or intended. Margaret Foster leaned forward, her expression kind but serious. "Sarah, we need to ask you some questions about your family background and your relationship to the founder of this company. Specifically, we need to know about your grandmother, Lily Chen, and whether you're aware of her connection to TechVision Solutions." The mention of my grandmother's name in this context was so unexpected that I actually felt dizzy. "I don't understand," I said. "My grandmother ran a small consulting business in Portland. She retired years ago. I don't see how she could be connected to TechVision." Richard Hamilton opened a file folder and removed several documents. "Lily Chen didn't run a small consulting business, Sarah. She founded what eventually became TechVision Solutions. The consulting company she started in the 1980s grew into a major technology firm, which was acquired and restructured several times over the years. Through various mergers and corporate reorganizations, it evolved into the company you work for today." The words made no sense. My grandmother had always described her business as modest, successful enough to support us comfortably, but nothing approaching the scale of a major corporation. She had paid for my education and living expenses without apparent strain, but I had assumed that was the result of careful saving and conservative investment, not significant wealth. Diana Rodriguez continued the explanation. "According to our corporate records and the documentation provided by Ms. Foster's firm, Lily Chen retained ownership stakes through each acquisition and merger. She was also granted additional shares as part of various consulting agreements and non-compete provisions. Over the decades, those holdings have grown substantially in value." Margaret Foster spread several documents across the table in front of me. "Your grandmother currently owns 43% of TechVision Solutions, making her the largest single shareholder. More significantly for your immediate situation, she established a trust several years ago that transfers her holdings to you upon your 28th birthday, which occurred 6 months ago." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I stared at the documents without really seeing them, trying to process information that contradicted everything I thought I knew about my family's financial situation and my own position in the world. "Are you saying that I own 43% of this company?" Richard Hamilton nodded gravely. "As of your birthday, yes. You are the largest shareholder in TechVision Solutions. though the trust stipulated that you wouldn't be informed of this inheritance until certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was that you demonstrate your professional capabilities and commitment to the company through your own merit, without knowledge of your ownership position. The implications crashed over me in waves. I wasn't just an employee fighting for recognition. I was an owner who had been mistreated by her own management team. Robert Mitchell hadn't just been stealing credit from a junior developer. He had been systematically undermining and humiliating someone who technically owned the company he worked for. The irony was so complete it was almost absurd. Thomas Chen spoke up, his technical background making him particularly interested in the innovation aspects of the situation. Your grandmother was very specific about wanting you to prove yourself on your own merits. She believed that knowing about the inheritance too early would interfere with your professional development and your ability to understand the business from the ground up. The trust specified that you should be informed only after you had established yourself as a valuable contributor, or if you faced significant workplace challenges that required intervention. Patricia Williams added, "The investigation into your complaints triggered the disclosure requirement. When we reviewed your personnel file and the evidence you provided, it became clear that you had more than met the professional development criteria. The systematic undermining of your contributions constituted the kind of workplace challenge that required us to reveal your ownership position." Diana Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, her expression mixing satisfaction with concern. "This creates a rather unique situation, Sarah. As the majority shareholder, you have significant influence over company operations and personnel decisions. The board has already voted to terminate Mr. Mitchell's employment based on the evidence of his inappropriate conduct toward you and other employees. However, we need to discuss how you want to handle your new role and responsibilities within the organization." The termination of Robert Mitchell should have felt like vindication, but instead it felt surreal, like watching events happen to someone else. 6 months ago, I had been celebrating my birthday in my small apartment, grateful for my job and hoping for eventual recognition of my work. Today, I was sitting in a conference room learning that I owned nearly half of a multi-million-dollar technology company and had the power to make decisions that would affect hundreds of employees. Margaret Foster explained the legal mechanics of the trust and the options available to me. I could take an active role in company management, join the board of directors, and participate directly in strategic decision-making. Alternatively, I could maintain a more passive ownership position, allowing the current management structure to continue while exercising my shareholder rights through voting and board representation. I could also choose to sell some or all of my shares, though the trust included provisions designed to keep ownership within the family. "There's no pressure to make immediate decisions about your level of involvement," Richard Hamilton assured me. "The trust was structured to give you flexibility and time to determine how you want to use this opportunity. Your grandmother was very thoughtful about protecting your interests while ensuring that you had genuine choices about your future." Diana Rodriguez addressed the immediate workplace situation. "Regardless of how you choose to handle your ownership position, we need to address the professional environment you've been working in. Your technical skills and innovative thinking are exactly what this company needs to grow and compete effectively. We'd like to discuss a significant promotion and a role that would allow you to lead major development projects while you decide how to exercise your shareholder rights." The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering financial details, legal requirements, and strategic options that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I asked questions about the company's performance, its competitive position, and its plans for future growth. The executives answered with the deference due to a major shareholder, but also with genuine respect for my technical knowledge and business acumen. As the meeting concluded, Diana handed me a thick folder containing detailed information about my inheritance, the company's financial status, and the various options available to me. "Take your time reviewing all of this," she said. "We'll schedule follow-up meetings to discuss your decisions, but there's no rush. The most important thing is that you understand your position and feel confident about whatever direction you choose." Walking back through the office, I felt like I was seeing everything through different eyes. These weren't just colleagues and supervisors. They were employees of a company I now partially owned. The projects I had been working on weren't just assignments. They were investments in my own financial future. The recognition I had been seeking wasn't just about personal validation. It was about ensuring that my company operated effectively and valued its most innovative contributors. Kevin Park was waiting by my desk when I returned, his expression anxious and curious. "That was a long meeting," he said carefully. "Everything okay?" I looked at him, this friend who had supported me through months of frustration and self-doubt, and realized that I couldn't share the full truth with anyone yet. The knowledge was too new, too overwhelming, and too potentially dangerous if it became office gossip before I had figured out how to handle my new position. "It's complicated," I said, which was the most honest answer I could give. "But I think things are going to change around here. For the better." That evening, I sat in my apartment with the inheritance documents spread across my kitchen table, trying to understand how my quiet, modest grandmother had built and maintained such significant wealth while living like a comfortable but unremarkable retiree. Her strategic thinking and long-term planning were more sophisticated than I had ever imagined, and her decision to keep me in the dark about my inheritance showed a level of wisdom about human nature and professional development that took my breath away. The chess metaphor she had used suddenly made perfect sense. I had been the hidden queen all along, moving across the board like a simple pawn, while my true power remained concealed. Robert Mitchell had been playing against an opponent whose strength he never suspected, undermining and dismissing someone who could have ended his career with a single phone call if she had known her true position. But now I did know, and everything was about to change. The question was no longer whether I would receive recognition for my work. It was how I would use my newfound power to transform TechVision into the kind of company where talent was valued, innovation was rewarded, and brilliant employees like Kevin Park and Marcus Thompson could thrive without fighting for basic respect. The real game was just beginning, and this time I knew exactly which piece I was playing. The first thing I did after learning about my inheritance was call my grandmother. Not to confront her or demand explanations, but because I needed to hear her voice and understand the woman who had orchestrated this extraordinary gift, while maintaining the perfect facade of a modest retiree. She answered on the second ring, as if she had been expecting my call. "Hello, Sarah," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I imagine you've had quite an interesting day." There were 1,000 questions I wanted to ask, but only one that really mattered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her answer came without hesitation, delivered in the calm tone of someone who had spent years thinking through every aspect of a complex decision. "Because telling you would have changed everything about who you became and how you learned to value yourself. You needed to discover your own strength before you could properly use the power that comes with ownership." We talked for over an hour, and slowly the full scope of her strategy became clear. Grandma Lily had been watching my career at TechVision from the beginning, not interfering but gathering information about my performance and the challenges I was facing. She had known about Robert Mitchell's treatment of me, about the stolen credit and systematic undermining, but she had waited for me to find my own voice and advocate for myself. "Power without wisdom is dangerous," she explained. "Wealth without character is destructive. You needed to prove to yourself that you could succeed on merit alone, before you could be trusted with the responsibility of ownership. The fact that you finally spoke up, that you fought for recognition rather than simply accepting mistreatment, showed me that you were ready." The conversation gave me a new appreciation for the woman who had raised me after my parents' death. She hadn't just provided financial support and emotional stability, she had been conducting a decades-long masterclass in leadership development, teaching me lessons I wouldn't understand until I was ready to apply them. Her apparent modesty had been strategic, her quiet retirement a carefully maintained cover story that allowed her to guide my development without corrupting it with premature knowledge of my inheritance. When I returned to work the following Monday, the changes were already evident. Robert Mitchell's office had been cleared out over the weekend, his personal items packed and removed so efficiently that it was as if he had never existed. Jennifer Walsh informed me that the company had reached a settlement with him that included a non-disclosure agreement and non-compete clause, ensuring that his departure would be quiet and his future opportunities limited. Marcus Thompson approached me that morning with news that felt like validation of everything I had been working toward. "I don't know what happened in that meeting last week," he said quietly, "but the word is that you're being promoted to Senior Development Lead, reporting directly to Thomas Chen. That's a big jump, Sarah. Congratulations." The promotion was significant, but it was also just the beginning. Thomas Chen called me into his office that afternoon to discuss my new responsibilities and the projects I would be leading. He treated me with the respect due to my technical skills, but I could also sense his awareness of my ownership position. The dynamic was strange, negotiating between my role as an employee and my status as a major shareholder. "We want to restructure the development department," Thomas explained, spreading organizational charts across his desk. "Your experience with Robert's management style has highlighted some serious problems with how we recognize and reward innovation. We're implementing new policies for project attribution and promotion criteria, and we'd like you to help design those systems." The irony wasn't lost on me. The mistreatment that had driven me to file complaints was now positioning me to fix the systemic problems that had created that mistreatment. I would be helping to build the kind of workplace I had always wanted to work in, using the authority I had gained through suffering under the old system. Kevin Park was one of the first people I was able to help directly. His technical expertise had been undervalued for years, his contributions to the company's infrastructure overlooked because IT support was seen as maintenance rather than innovation. With my new authority, I was able to advocate for his promotion to Senior Systems Architect, a position that recognized both his technical skills and his strategic thinking about technology infrastructure. "I don't understand what happened," Kevin said when Jennifer Walsh delivered the news of his promotion. "2 weeks ago, I was invisible. Now suddenly I'm being offered a leadership position with a 40% salary increase. Did you have something to do with this?" I smiled and gave him the same answer I had been giving everyone who asked about the sudden changes in company culture and personnel decisions. Sometimes things just work out the way they're supposed to. The truth was more complicated. My new role as Senior Development Lead was just the public face of much more significant changes happening at the corporate level. I was attending board meetings as an observer, learning about strategic planning and financial management, while the other board members adjusted to having the company's largest shareholder sitting quietly in the corner, taking notes and asking occasionally penetrating questions. Diana Rodriguez proved to be an excellent mentor for navigating the complexities of corporate governance. She had been working with boards and major shareholders for decades, and she understood the delicate balance between exercising authority and building consensus. "The temptation when you discover this kind of power," she told me during one of our private conversations, "is to make dramatic changes immediately. But sustainable transformation requires patience and strategy." Her advice proved invaluable as I began to understand the full scope of TechVision's operations and challenges. The company was profitable and growing, but it was also struggling with talent retention and innovation stagnation. Many of the problems I had experienced personally were symptoms of larger cultural issues that affected multiple departments and countless employees. I spent my evenings reading through years of board meeting minutes, financial reports, and strategic planning documents. The picture that emerged was of a company that had grown rapidly but hadn't developed the management practices necessary to sustain that growth while maintaining quality and innovation. Robert Mitchell hadn't been an anomaly. He had been a product of a system that rewarded short-term results over long-term development of people and capabilities. The first major change I championed was the implementation of a comprehensive innovation recognition program. Working with Jennifer Walsh and the Human Resources team, we developed policies that ensured proper attribution of ideas and contributions, created clear pathways for advancement based on merit, and established mentorship programs that paired experienced employees with emerging talent. Marcus Thompson became my partner in revolutionizing the technical side of the organization. His years of experience and quiet authority made him an ideal collaborator for implementing changes that would improve both the quality of our work and the satisfaction of our employees. 3 months after the revelation that transformed my understanding of my place in the corporate world, I found myself sitting in the same conference room where Robert Mitchell had once dismissed my contributions as insignificant. This time, however, I was leading the quarterly board meeting, presenting a comprehensive strategy for transforming TechVision Solutions into the kind of company that attracted and retained the industry's most innovative minds. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. Word of my ownership position had eventually leaked through the corporate rumor mill, creating a complex dynamic with employees who were trying to understand whether my rapid advancement was due to merit or inheritance. Some colleagues who had previously ignored me now sought my attention with transparent opportunism, while others maintained a suspicious distance, unsure whether to trust someone whose power had been so dramatically revealed. Diana Rodriguez had warned me about this adjustment period during one of our weekly mentoring sessions. People will question everything about your rise, she had said, including your previous accomplishments. You'll need to prove yourself all over again, not because your work wasn't excellent before, but because people need to reconcile their perception of you as a junior employee with your reality as a major shareholder. The quarterly presentation I was delivering focused on the measurable improvements we had implemented since restructuring the development department. Employee satisfaction scores had increased by 35%, voluntary turnover had decreased by half, and our project completion rates had improved significantly. More importantly, we were generating more innovative solutions and filing more patents than in any previous period in the company's history. Margaret Foster, the corporate attorney who had helped reveal my inheritance, sat at the far end of the conference table, occasionally taking notes as I outlined the legal and compliance aspects of our new recognition policies. The systems we had implemented weren't just about fairness and employee satisfaction. They were also about protecting the company from future discrimination claims and ensuring that our intellectual property was properly documented and attributed. Thomas Chen nodded approvingly as I discussed the technical innovations that had emerged from our reorganized teams. The inventory management system that Robert Mitchell had once claimed as his own achievement had been expanded and refined, becoming the foundation for a new product line that was generating significant revenue for the company. 3 other major clients had requested similar customizations, and we were exploring the possibility of developing a standalone software package that could be marketed to other businesses. The success of these initiatives was gratifying, but what mattered more to me was the change in workplace culture. Kevin Park had thrived in his new role as senior systems architect, developing infrastructure improvements that made everyone's work more efficient and secure. Marcus Thompson had been promoted to Director of Technical Innovation, a position that allowed him to mentor younger developers while pursuing cutting-edge projects that pushed the boundaries of what our industry considered possible. Patricia Williams, the CFO, was particularly interested in the financial impact of our cultural changes. "The numbers are impressive," she said, reviewing the quarterly reports on her tablet. "Productivity is up, costs are down, and we're seeing revenue growth that directly correlates with the improvements you've implemented. From a purely business perspective, this transformation has been remarkably successful. The financial validation was important, but it wasn't the real measure of success as far as I was concerned. The real victory was visible in the daily interactions between team members, in the energy and enthusiasm that people brought to their work, and in the steady stream of innovative solutions that emerged when brilliant people felt valued and supported." After the board meeting, I walked through the office with new eyes, seeing not just the physical space, but the human dynamics that made the company function. The cubicle where I had once sat, frustrated and undervalued, was now occupied by a recent graduate named Lisa Wong, a talented programmer who reminded me of myself at that age. Unlike my experience, however, Lisa was being mentored by Marcus Thompson and had already contributed to 2 major projects that would advance her career and increase her visibility within the organization. The transformation of TechVision had required more than policy changes and personnel decisions. It had demanded a fundamental shift in how we thought about leadership, recognition, and the relationship between individual achievement and collective success. The systems we implemented weren't just about preventing future Robert Mitchells from undermining talented employees. They were about creating an environment where innovation flourished and people could achieve their full potential. Jennifer Walsh had been instrumental in developing the human resources frameworks that supported these changes. She had conducted extensive research into best practices at other technology companies, interviewed employees about their experiences and aspirations, and designed training programs that helped managers understand their role in fostering innovation and professional development. "The most significant change," Jennifer told me during one of our regular check-ins, "isn't in the policies themselves, but in the mindset shift throughout the organization. People understand now that their contributions matter, that their ideas will be heard, and that their career advancement depends on their performance rather than their ability to navigate political relationships." The ripple effects of these changes extended beyond TechVision itself. Our success in transforming workplace culture had attracted attention from industry publications and business schools, leading to speaking opportunities and consulting requests from other companies struggling with similar challenges. I found myself reluctantly becoming a voice for workplace equity and innovation management. a role I had never sought but felt obligated to embrace. The most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 6 months after my ownership revelation, I received a handwritten letter from a woman named Andrea Martinez, a software engineer at a competing company, who had read about TechVision's transformation in a trade publication. She wrote about her own experiences with workplace discrimination and idea theft, expressing gratitude that someone had successfully challenged these practices and created positive change. "Your story gives me hope," Andrea wrote, "that speaking up about unfair treatment isn't career suicide, and that companies can actually change when the right people are willing to fight for what's right. I've started documenting my own contributions more carefully and advocating for myself more directly, inspired by your example." The letter reminded me that the changes we had implemented at TechVision were part of a larger movement toward creating more equitable and innovative workplaces throughout the technology industry. My personal journey from undervalued employee to empowered owner had become a case study in the importance of recognizing and developing talent regardless of traditional hierarchies and expectations. Grandma Lily visited Seattle for the first time since my inheritance revelation, ostensibly to see how I was adjusting to my new responsibilities but really to observe the transformation of her life's work. She spent a day touring the office, meeting employees, and discussing our strategic initiatives with the senior management team. Her questions were penetrating and her observations astute, revealing the depth of business acumen that had built the foundation for everything I was now building upon. "You've honored the legacy while making it your own," she told me over dinner at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. "The company I founded was successful, but it wasn't particularly innovative in its approach to developing people. What you've built here is something more significant than I ever achieved." Her words carried weight because I knew they were true. The TechVision she had created had been financially successful, but had suffered from many of the same cultural problems that had made my early experience there so frustrating. By transforming those practices, I hadn't just improved my own situation. I had evolved her legacy into something that reflected both her strategic vision and my values about how people should be treated in professional environments. The conversation with my grandmother also revealed the full scope of her long-term planning. The trust that had transferred ownership to me included provisions for continued growth and development, with mechanisms for reinvesting profits into research and development, employee education, and community outreach programs. She had structured the inheritance not just as wealth transfer, but as a foundation for ongoing positive impact. "Wealth is responsibility," she explained, echoing lessons she had taught me throughout my childhood but which I was only now beginning to fully understand. "The resources you now control aren't just for your benefit. They're tools for creating opportunities for others and solving problems that matter beyond quarterly profit margins." This perspective shaped my approach to strategic planning for TechVision's future. Rather than focusing solely on maximizing shareholder returns, we were investing in long-term initiatives that would strengthen our competitive position while creating value for employees, customers, and the broader community. We established partnerships with local universities to provide internships and research opportunities, developed mentorship programs that connected our experienced employees with students from underrepresented backgrounds, and allocated resources for pro bono technology solutions for nonprofit organizations. The most ambitious initiative was the creation of an innovation lab dedicated to solving complex technical challenges that had the potential for significant social impact. Unlike traditional corporate research and development, which focused primarily on commercially viable products, the Innovation Lab was designed to pursue breakthrough solutions in areas like accessibility technology, environmental monitoring, and educational tools for underserved communities. Marcus Thompson eagerly accepted the role of directing this new initiative, bringing together the technical expertise and social consciousness that made him an ideal leader for projects that balanced innovation with purpose. The lab's first major project involved developing software tools that would help small businesses in developing countries access and utilize cloud-based services more effectively, potentially transforming economic opportunities for entrepreneurs who lacked access to traditional technology infrastructure. Kevin Park contributed his systems expertise to ensuring that the Innovation Lab's infrastructure could support ambitious projects while maintaining the security and reliability standards that protected both our proprietary research and our clients' confidential information. His work in this area demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had been overlooked during his years in routine IT support, validating my decision to advocate for his promotion and expanded responsibilities. The cultural transformation at TechVision also influenced my personal relationships and my understanding of leadership itself. The experience of wielding significant corporate power had taught me that true authority comes not from hierarchical position, but from the ability to inspire others to achieve their best work. The most effective changes we implemented weren't mandated from above, but emerged through collaborative processes that engaged employees at all levels in designing solutions to workplace challenges. Diana Rodriguez continued to serve as my mentor and advisor, but our relationship had evolved into more of a partnership as I gained experience and confidence in corporate governance. Her guidance had been crucial during the early months of my transition, but increasingly I was developing my own leadership style and strategic vision that reflected my technical background and my commitment to creating positive change. "You've become the kind of leader I hoped you would be," Diana told me during one of our recent conversations. "Not someone who uses power to dominate others, but someone who uses influence to elevate everyone around them. That's the difference between management and leadership, and it's what will make TechVision successful in the long term." The validation from someone I respected deeply was meaningful, but the real measure of my growth as a leader was visible in the daily operations of the company and the satisfaction of the people who worked there. We had created an environment where brilliant engineers like Lisa Wong could contribute meaningfully from their first day, where experienced professionals like Marcus Thompson could pursue challenging projects that utilized their full capabilities, and where supporting staff like Kevin Park could advance based on their contributions rather than their ability to navigate political relationships. The journey from frustrated junior developer to empowered business owner had taught me lessons about resilience, strategic thinking, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the personal costs seem overwhelming. But perhaps the most important lesson was that true success isn't measured by individual achievement, but by the positive impact you create for others and the legacy you build through your choices and actions. Looking back on that humiliating quarterly meeting where Robert Mitchell had stolen credit for my work, I realized that his behavior had ultimately served as the catalyst for transformation that benefited everyone at TechVision. Without that final, intolerable act of professional disrespect, I might never have found the courage to speak up, never have triggered the investigation that revealed my ownership position, and never have gained the platform necessary to create meaningful change. The corporate empire that my grandmother had built and carefully transferred to me was now something more than a successful business. It was a laboratory for proving that companies could be both profitable and principled, both innovative and equitable. The work we were doing at TechVision was creating ripple effects throughout the industry, inspiring other organizations to examine their own practices and consider how they could better support and develop their most talented employees. As I prepared for the next phase of strategic planning, focused on expanding our social impact initiatives, while maintaining our competitive position in the rapidly evolving technology market, I carried with me the knowledge that real power isn't about controlling others, but about creating opportunities for others to discover and utilize their own power. The chess game my grandmother had prepared me for was far more complex and meaningful than I had ever imagined, and I was finally ready to play it with the wisdom and purpose that would honor her legacy while building something uniquely my own. 2 years had passed since that life-changing moment in the conference room, when I discovered that the company where I had struggled for recognition was actually mine to lead. The anniversary arrived quietly, marked not by grand celebrations but by the steady hum of an organization that had fundamentally transformed itself from the inside out. As I sat in what was once Robert Mitchell's corner office, now redesigned as an open collaboration space where teams gathered to brainstorm and solve complex problems, I reflected on how dramatically both TechVision and I had evolved. The morning brought news that would have seemed impossible during my days as an overlooked junior developer. MIT had invited me to deliver the keynote address at their annual Technology Leadership Conference. speaking to an audience of industry executives, academic researchers, and emerging entrepreneurs about building sustainable innovation cultures in corporate environments. The invitation letter specifically mentioned our success in creating measurable improvements in both employee satisfaction and business performance, citing TechVision as a model for how companies could thrive while prioritizing human development. Standing in front of the mirror in my apartment that morning, adjusting the same navy blazer that had become my symbol of professional confidence, I thought about the young woman who had once rehearsed speeches hoping for basic acknowledgement from a dismissive supervisor. That person felt like a distant relative now, someone I remembered fondly but whose struggles belonged to a different lifetime. The confidence I wore now wasn't armor against rejection. It was the natural expression of someone who had learned to value herself independent of external validation. The transformation of TechVision had exceeded every expectation we had established during those early strategic planning sessions. Our employee retention rate had become the envy of the industry, with talented professionals actively seeking positions at our company specifically because of our reputation for recognizing and developing individual contributions. The innovation lab that Marcus Thompson directed had produced 3 breakthrough technologies that were being licensed to major corporations, generating revenue streams that funded expanded research while proving that purpose-driven work could be exceptionally profitable. Kevin Park had become something of a legend in technology infrastructure circles, speaking at conferences about the systems architecture he had developed for supporting both commercial operations and social impact initiatives. His promotion from overlooked IT support to recognized industry expert demonstrated the potential that existed when organizations created genuine pathways for advancement based on capability rather than corporate politics. Watching him present his work to rooms full of senior executives who hung on his every word felt like witnessing justice finally served. Lisa Wong, the recent graduate who had occupied my old cubicle, was now leading her own development team and mentoring newer employees with the same patience and wisdom that Marcus Thompson had shown me during my early struggles. The cycle of recognition and support had become self-perpetuating, creating an environment where emerging talent was nurtured rather than ignored, where innovative thinking was rewarded rather than appropriated by others. The success story that generated the most personal satisfaction was Andrea Martinez, the software engineer who had written to me after reading about TechVision's transformation. She had followed through on her commitment to advocate for herself, eventually filing her own workplace complaint that led to significant changes at her company. 6 months later, she had been promoted to a leadership position where she was implementing recognition policies similar to those we had developed. Her courage to speak up had created positive change for dozens of other employees, proving that one person's willingness to challenge unfairness could generate exponential impact. The MIT keynote represented more than professional recognition. It was an opportunity to share the lessons we had learned about the relationship between personal empowerment and organizational success. The speech I had prepared focused on 3 core principles that had guided our transformation: the importance of creating systems that recognize individual contributions, the value of developing talent regardless of traditional hierarchies, and the power of turning personal adversity into positive change for others. Preparing for the presentation had required me to articulate insights that had emerged through experience rather than theory. The most significant lesson was that sustainable change in corporate culture required more than policy adjustments. It demanded a fundamental shift in how leaders understood their role in developing human potential. The managers who succeeded in our transformed environment were those who measured their success by the growth and advancement of their team members, rather than by their ability to claim credit for collective achievements. Grandma Lily had agreed to attend the MIT conference. Her first public appearance since my inheritance revelation had made our family's business history a matter of public record. At 82, she moved with the careful dignity of someone who had built something significant and lived to see it evolve beyond her original vision. Her presence at the conference would mark the first time she had spoken publicly about the strategic decisions that had shaped both TechVision's development and my own preparation for leadership. The conversation we had the night before the conference revealed dimensions of her planning that I was still discovering. The timing of my inheritance hadn't been arbitrary. It had been calculated to coincide with the professional challenges that would test my character and demonstrate my readiness for significant responsibility. She had known about Robert Mitchell's management style and had anticipated that working under such conditions would either break my spirit or forge the resilience necessary for transformational leadership. Adversity reveals character, she explained as we sat in her hotel room overlooking the Charles River. I needed to know that you would fight for what was right, even when fighting seemed impossible, that you would value fairness and recognition for others once you gained the power to provide them. The inheritance was never just about wealth. It was about ensuring that TechVision would be led by someone who understood the human cost of poor leadership and was committed to preventing it. Her words reframed everything I thought I knew about my journey from frustrated employee to empowered owner. The struggles I had endured weren't unfortunate circumstances that had accidentally prepared me for leadership. They were carefully orchestrated experiences designed to develop the empathy and determination necessary for creating positive change. The humiliation I had felt in that quarterly meeting, the months of having my work appropriated and minimized, the decision to finally speak up despite potential consequences, all of it had been part of a larger education in the complexities of power and responsibility. The MIT presentation went better than I had dared to hope. The audience of seasoned executives and emerging leaders responded with engaged questions and thoughtful discussions about implementing similar changes in their own organizations. Several attendees approached me afterward with requests for consulting partnerships, seeking guidance on how to diagnose and address cultural problems that were limiting their company's innovation potential. The most meaningful response came from a young woman named Rachel Kim, a recently promoted engineering manager who was struggling with team dynamics eerily similar to what I had experienced under Robert Mitchell's supervision. Her questions about documenting contributions and advocating for team members revealed the same frustration and determination that had once driven me to Jennifer Walsh's office with a folder full of evidence. How do you find the courage to challenge someone with more power than you have? Rachel asked during the networking reception that followed my presentation. The question took me back to that moment of decision when I had finally chosen to speak up rather than continue accepting unfair treatment. You find courage when staying silent becomes more painful than the risk of speaking up, I told her. And you remember that the people coming after you deserve better than the system you're willing to tolerate. Rachel's expression suggested that my words had resonated with her own situation. We exchanged contact information, and I made a mental note to follow up with her in a few weeks. The cycle of mentorship and support that had transformed TechVision was expanding beyond our company, creating networks of professionals committed to advancing fairness and recognition in their own workplace environments. The success of the MIT presentation led to additional speaking opportunities and consulting requests that required me to think more strategically about how to balance my responsibilities at TechVision with my growing role as an advocate for workplace equity. Diana Rodriguez suggested establishing a formal consulting division within our company, allowing us to monetize our expertise in organizational transformation while expanding our positive impact throughout the technology industry. The proposal made sense from both business and mission perspectives. We had developed proven methodologies for diagnosing cultural problems, implementing recognition systems, and measuring the impact of workplace changes. Sharing these tools with other organizations would generate additional revenue streams while advancing the broader goal of creating more equitable and innovative corporate environments across the industry. Marcus Thompson enthusiastically supported the consulting initiative, seeing it as an extension of the Innovation Lab's mission to solve complex problems with broader social significance. Kevin Park volunteered to develop the technology infrastructure that would support remote consulting services, while Jennifer Walsh began documenting our human resources frameworks for adaptation by other companies. The momentum building around our transformation story reached a crescendo when Harvard Business School requested permission to develop a case study examining TechVision's cultural evolution and its impact on business performance. The research would involve extensive interviews with employees at all levels, analysis of our financial data and operational metrics, and comparison with industry benchmarks for innovation and retention. Professor Elena Vasquez, who would be leading the case study development, explained that our story represented a unique opportunity to examine the relationship between workplace equity and business success. Most research in this area focuses on either the moral arguments for fair treatment or the business case for diversity, she said during our initial meeting. Your experience provides a rare example of how addressing systematic unfairness can generate measurable improvements in both employee satisfaction and financial performance. The Harvard case study would ensure that the lessons we had learned at TechVision would reach future business leaders through one of the world's most influential MBA programs. Students would analyze our transformation process, debate our strategic decisions, and develop their own approaches to similar challenges. The ripple effects of our journey from dysfunction to excellence would extend far beyond the technology industry, influencing how future executives thought about leadership, recognition, and the development of human potential. As the second anniversary of my inheritance revelation approached, I found myself increasingly focused on the question of legacy and long-term impact. The changes we had implemented at TechVision were sustainable and continuing to generate positive results. But I wanted to ensure that our model for organizational transformation would outlast my own involvement with the company. The consulting division, the Harvard case study, and the growing network of professionals implementing similar changes in their own organizations were all part of building something larger than any individual company or leader. The most ambitious initiative we were considering involved establishing a foundation dedicated to supporting workplace equity research and implementation. The foundation would fund academic studies examining the relationship between recognition systems and innovation, provide grants for organizations seeking to implement cultural changes, and create fellowships for emerging leaders committed to advancing fairness in corporate environments. Grandma Lily's response to the foundation proposal revealed another dimension of her long-term vision for the inheritance she had carefully planned. The trust documents included provisions for exactly this kind of philanthropic expansion, with mechanisms for converting business profits into social impact funding while maintaining TechVision's competitive position and growth trajectory. Building a successful company was always just the first step, she explained during one of our strategic planning conversations. The real measure of success is whether that company becomes a catalyst for positive change that extends far beyond its own operations. You've proven that fairness and profitability can coexist. Now you can help others prove it too. The foundation launch was scheduled to coincide with the third anniversary of Robert Mitchell's termination, a symbolic timing that would transform the date of my greatest professional humiliation into an annual celebration of positive change and expanding opportunity. The irony was almost poetic. The man who had dismissed my contributions as insignificant had inadvertently catalyzed a movement that was reshaping how organizations thought about talent development and recognition. On the evening before the foundation announcement, I walked through the TechVision offices one more time, observing the environment we had created through determination, strategic thinking, and the courage to challenge systems that weren't working. The open collaboration spaces buzzed with creative energy, the innovation lab hummed with purposeful research, and the conference rooms hosted planning sessions for projects that would benefit both our company and the broader community. The transformation was complete, but the story was still being written. Every employee who felt valued and supported, every innovative solution that emerged from our collaborative culture, every other organization that implemented similar changes based on our example, all of it represented the continuing evolution of a simple principle that my grandmother had taught me decades earlier. Treat people with respect, and they will accomplish extraordinary things. Standing in the lobby where I had once waited nervously for interviews and performance reviews, I thought about the young woman who had been so desperate for recognition that she would have been grateful for basic acknowledgement of her contributions. That person's struggles had been real and painful, but they had also been necessary preparation for understanding how to create environments where others would never have to fight so hard for such basic professional dignity. The security guard nodded as I headed toward the exit, the same friendly gesture he had offered for years but which now felt like acknowledgement between colleagues, rather than polite recognition of someone whose presence barely registered. Outside, Seattle's skyline glittered with the lights of other companies, other organizations where talented people were either flourishing or struggling depending on the leadership cultures that shaped their daily experiences. Tomorrow would bring the foundation announcement, new consulting partnerships, and continued expansion of our model for organizational transformation. But tonight, walking to my car under stars that reminded me of childhood dreams about exploration and discovery, I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that we had solved the problem that had once seemed insurmountable. We had proven that companies could be both successful and fair, that leaders could be both powerful and principled, and that one person's courage to speak up could create positive change that rippled far beyond anything they could have imagined. The corporate empire my grandmother had built and strategically transferred to me was now something more than a business success story. It was a laboratory for proving that the future of work could be different from its problematic past, and a launching platform for helping others build the kinds of organizations where brilliance could flourish regardless of background, politics, or traditional hierarchies. The chess game was far from over, but we were finally playing it with the wisdom and purpose that would ensure victory for everyone who deserved recognition, opportunity, and the chance to transform their own professional dreams into reality. 5 years after discovering my true position at TechVision Solutions, I stood before a packed auditorium at the World Economic Forum in Davos, addressing an international audience of business leaders, government officials, and social innovators about the global movement toward equitable workplace transformation. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had once been dismissed as lacking vision was now helping to shape the future of corporate culture on a worldwide stage. The presentation that morning focused on the research findings from our newly established Institute for Workplace Innovation, a think tank that had emerged from the foundation we launched 3 years earlier. Our data showed that companies implementing comprehensive recognition and development systems were experiencing average productivity increases of 42%, retention improvements of 67%, and innovation metrics that consistently outperformed traditional hierarchical organizations by substantial margins. The audience included CEOs from Fortune 500 companies, startup founders from emerging economies, and policymakers working on employment legislation that would incentivize fair workplace practices. Among them sat Rachel Kim, who had become a close collaborator and was now directing organizational transformation initiatives at 3 major technology firms. Her journey from struggling middle manager to influential change agent exemplified the multiplier effect that occurred when empowered individuals gained the tools and confidence to advocate for systemic improvements. Following my presentation, a CEO from a German automotive company approached with questions about implementing our recognition frameworks in manufacturing environments. His company was struggling with engineer retention and wanted to understand how technical innovation could be better supported through cultural changes. The conversation revealed how broadly applicable our principles had become, extending far beyond the technology sector into industries where creative problem-solving and employee engagement were critical competitive advantages. The consulting division at TechVision had grown into a standalone entity serving clients across 6 continents, with specialized teams addressing the unique challenges faced by different industries and cultural contexts. Marcus Thompson had transitioned from directing our innovation lab to leading global consulting operations, while Kevin Park had developed technology platforms that allowed us to deliver training and support services remotely to organizations in developing markets. The most rewarding aspect of our expanded impact was witnessing the emergence of second-generation leaders who had been shaped by equitable workplace practices from the beginning of their careers. Lisa Wong, who had started as a junior developer during TechVision's transformation, was now CEO of a startup that had explicitly built its culture around recognition and collaborative innovation. Her company's success demonstrated that organizations founded on these principles could compete effectively with traditional competitors while maintaining superior employee satisfaction and retention. Andrea Martinez had become a prominent advocate for workplace equity in Silicon Valley, serving on boards and advisory committees that influenced policy decisions affecting millions of workers. Her willingness to challenge unfair treatment had ultimately led to industry-wide conversations about attribution, advancement, and the systemic barriers that prevented talented individuals from reaching their full potential. The Harvard Business School case study examining TechVision's transformation had become one of the most frequently taught materials in their leadership curriculum, with professors reporting that students consistently ranked it among the most influential content in their MBA programs. Professor Elena Vasquez had expanded her research into a comprehensive book that examines similar transformations at organizations around the world, establishing academic credibility for approaches that many executives had initially dismissed as unrealistic idealism. During a private dinner following the Davos presentation, I found myself seated next to Dr. Amira Hassan, an organizational psychologist who had spent decades studying the relationship between workplace culture and human performance. Her research had provided crucial validation for many of the practices we had developed, demonstrating measurable improvements in creativity, problem-solving, and emotional well-being among employees working in environments that prioritized recognition and development. "What strikes me most about your story," Dr. Hassan said as we discussed the evolution of workplace science, "is how personal adversity became the foundation for understanding systemic problems. Most organizational consultants develop their expertise through academic study or observational research. You learned these lessons by living through dysfunction and then having the opportunity to design solutions from a position of actual authority." Her observation highlighted something I had been reflecting on increasingly. As our influence expanded beyond individual companies to entire industries and government policies, the credibility that allowed me to advocate for workplace equity came not from theoretical knowledge but from authentic experience of both unfair treatment and the transformation process required to address it. The emotional understanding of what it felt like to be overlooked and undervalued informed every recommendation we made to client organizations. The Foundation's research initiatives had expanded to include longitudinal studies tracking the career trajectories of employees who had experienced workplace transformations similar to TechVision's. The preliminary findings were remarkable, showing that individuals who worked in equitable environments during their early careers became more effective leaders, more innovative contributors, and more committed to advancing fairness in their subsequent positions. One of the most significant developments was the emergence of international policy discussions about workplace equity standards. Several European Union countries were considering legislation that would require large corporations to demonstrate measurable progress in recognition systems and advancement opportunities. The policy frameworks being debated drew heavily on research conducted through our institute and the practical examples provided by companies that had successfully implemented comprehensive cultural changes. Grandma Lily, now 87, had become something of a celebrity in business circles, frequently invited to speak about long-term strategic thinking and the relationship between personal values and corporate success. Her story of building TechVision while simultaneously planning for its transformation through careful leadership development had inspired countless entrepreneurs and executives to consider their own legacy and succession strategies. During one of our regular monthly dinners, she shared reflections on watching the ripple effects of decisions she had made decades earlier. "When I structured your inheritance to include those development requirements," she said, "I hoped it would prepare you to be a good leader for one company. I never imagined it would contribute to changing how thousands of organizations think about developing human potential." Her humility was characteristic but misplaced. The strategic vision that had shaped both TechVision's growth and my preparation for leadership had required extraordinary foresight and patience. The timing of each revelation, from my initial hiring to the eventual disclosure of my ownership position, had been calculated to maximize both my personal development and the company's readiness for transformation. The success of our consulting work had attracted attention from unexpected quarters, including government agencies interested in applying our recognition and development frameworks to public sector organizations. The military had expressed particular interest in understanding how our approaches might improve retention and innovation in highly structured environments where traditional hierarchies were considered essential for operational effectiveness. A pilot program with the Department of Defense was yielding promising results, showing that even organizations with strict command structures could benefit from better recognition of individual contributions and more systematic approaches to talent development. The challenge was adapting our frameworks to environments where security concerns and operational requirements limited the kind of transparency and collaboration that had been central to TechVision's transformation. The international expansion of our consulting practice had also revealed cultural variations in how workplace equity was understood and implemented. Organizations in different countries faced unique challenges related to local business customs, legal frameworks, and social expectations about hierarchy and authority. Our teams had developed specialized expertise in navigating these variations, while maintaining the core principles that made recognition systems effective. In Japan, we worked with technology companies struggling to balance traditional respect for seniority with the need to recognize younger employees' innovative contributions. In Brazil, our focus was on addressing gender disparities in advancement opportunities within engineering departments. In Nigeria, we helped growing firms develop recognition systems that could scale effectively as they expanded from regional to international operations. Each international engagement taught us something new about the universal human needs for recognition and development, while highlighting the importance of cultural sensitivity in implementing organizational changes. The frameworks we had developed at TechVision provided a foundation, but successful transformation always required adaptation to local contexts and specific industry challenges. The most personally meaningful development was the establishment of scholarship programs that supported students from underrepresented backgrounds in pursuing technology education and leadership development. The scholarships were funded through the foundation but administered through partnerships with universities worldwide, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't prevent talented individuals from accessing the education and opportunities they needed to become future change agents. Recipients of these scholarships were required to participate in mentorship programs and commit to advancing workplace equity in their eventual careers. Many had already begun making significant contributions while still completing their studies, developing innovative solutions to accessibility challenges, creating more inclusive technology products, and advocating for fair treatment in their internship and early career experiences. Sarah Kim, a scholarship recipient studying computer science at Stanford, had developed a software platform that helped organizations track and analyze their recognition and advancement patterns, providing data-driven insights into potential equity issues before they became systemic problems. Her work demonstrated how the next generation of leaders was building on our foundations while developing their own innovative approaches to workplace fairness. The technology industry continued to grapple with diversity and inclusion challenges, but the conversation had shifted significantly from awareness building to implementation of specific practices and measurement of concrete outcomes. Our research and consulting work had contributed to this evolution by providing practical tools and demonstrable examples of how equitable practices could coexist with business success. Major technology conferences now regularly featured sessions on recognition systems, development frameworks, and cultural transformation strategies. The presentations attracted standing-room-only audiences and generated extensive discussion about best practices and implementation challenges. The normalization of these conversations represented progress that would have seemed impossible during my early career, when raising concerns about fair treatment was often dismissed as complaining or inability to adapt to workplace realities. The academic community had embraced workplace equity as a legitimate field of study, with business schools offering specialized courses and research programs focused on organizational transformation and human-centered leadership. Students graduating from these programs entered the workforce with knowledge and expectations that accelerated the adoption of equitable practices across industries. Corporate boards were increasingly asking pointed questions about recognition systems, advancement opportunities, and cultural metrics during executive evaluations and strategic planning sessions. The business case for workplace equity had been established so convincingly that companies could no longer dismiss these concerns as secondary to financial performance. Board members understood that cultural problems created legal liabilities, limited innovation potential, and threatened long-term competitive positioning. The legal landscape had also evolved to provide stronger protections for employees raising concerns about unfair treatment and more significant consequences for organizations that failed to address systematic equity issues. Employment attorneys reported increased success in cases involving idea theft, advancement discrimination, and hostile work environments, partly because improved documentation standards made it easier to demonstrate patterns of problematic behavior. As I prepared for my next major presentation at the Global Leadership Summit in Singapore, I reflected on the exponential growth of the movement that had emerged from one person's decision to document unfair treatment and speak up for herself. The consulting engagements, policy discussions, academic research, and scholarship programs represented different facets of a comprehensive approach to transforming how work functioned for millions of people worldwide. The presentation in Singapore would focus on the next phase of our research, examining how artificial intelligence and remote work technologies could be leveraged to create more equitable and inclusive workplace experiences. The pandemic had accelerated adoption of distributed work models, creating both opportunities and challenges for maintaining culture and recognition systems when teams were geographically dispersed. Our preliminary research suggested that technology could actually enhance equity by providing better documentation of contributions, more systematic approaches to recognition, and reduced bias in evaluation processes. However, realizing these benefits required intentional design of systems and processes that prioritized fairness, rather than simply replicating existing hierarchies in digital formats. The Institute was collaborating with technology companies to develop AI-powered tools that could analyze communication patterns, project contributions, and advancement decisions to identify potential equity issues before they became entrenched problems. These tools represented the next evolution of workplace fairness, using data and automation to create more objective and inclusive environments. Standing in my office overlooking Elliott Bay on the evening before my departure for Singapore, I thought about the trajectory that had brought me from frustrated junior developer to global advocate for workplace transformation. The view from the 34th floor encompassed the entire city where my professional journey had begun, but the perspective was completely different now. The young woman who had once rehearsed speeches hoping for basic recognition from a dismissive supervisor had evolved into someone whose voice influenced policy decisions affecting millions of workers worldwide. The transformation wasn't just about personal advancement. It represented proof that individual courage could catalyze systemic change when combined with strategic thinking and persistent effort. The Foundation's annual report showed that our direct and indirect influence had contributed to workplace improvements, benefiting an estimated 2.3 million employees across 47 countries. The number was abstract, but it represented individual human beings who were experiencing more recognition, better advancement opportunities, and greater respect for their contributions, because someone had been willing to challenge unfair systems and work to build better alternatives. TechVision Solutions continued to thrive under the leadership structure we had established, with employee satisfaction scores remaining consistently above industry benchmarks and innovation metrics continuing to outperform traditional competitors. The company had become a case study not just in cultural transformation, but in sustainable business practices that prioritized long-term value creation over short-term profit maximization. The consulting division was scheduled to spin off as an independent entity within the next year, allowing it to serve clients without potential conflicts of interest, while maintaining the research and development capabilities that had made our framework so effective. The transition would mark another evolution in the expanding impact of principles that had emerged from personal adversity and been refined through practical application. As I packed for the Singapore trip, I included a small framed photograph that had become my personal symbol of the journey from invisibility to influence. It showed the entire TechVision team at our most recent company retreat, a diverse group of talented professionals who had chosen to work for an organization known for recognizing and developing their capabilities. In the center of the group photo, barely visible but meaningful to me, was the small navy blazer that had accompanied me through every significant moment of this transformation. The woman wearing that blazer had learned that true power wasn't about controlling others, but about creating opportunities for others to discover and utilize their own power. She had discovered that sustainable success required building systems that could function effectively, regardless of who was in leadership positions. Most importantly, she had proven that individual courage to challenge unfairness could generate positive change extending far beyond anything she could have imagined when she first decided to speak up for herself. The flight to Singapore would begin another chapter in the continuing evolution of workplace equity, but the foundations were now solid enough to support whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The movement had grown beyond any single person or organization, becoming a global force for creating environments where brilliance could flourish regardless of background, politics, or traditional hierarchies. The chess game my grandmother had prepared me for was finally being played with the wisdom and purpose that would ensure victory for everyone who deserved recognition, opportunity, and the chance to transform their own professional dreams into reality. The Queen had revealed her true position, and the board would never look the same again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.